smiling at him. 6 to shoot. James steps back. The three from there, Mike. And knocks it down. LeBron James from downtown.
When you think of basketball, you think of the NBA. But what about British basketball and the BBL? It looks the same, it sounds the same, but is it the same? The BBL is the highest basketball league in the UK and attracts some big talent, but the sport as a whole is struggling. Through this documentary, I'm going to look at the different areas to see what needs to be done to grow British basketball and the challenges it currently faces. There are many questions that need to be answered in order to find out what the struggles are. How is funding affecting basketball?
We need funding, that's it, bottom line really. The sport has to be supported, it's a great sport, it's the second biggest in the world.
Should Olympic medals be a priority?
Clearly the medal potential formula is flawed.
Does the sport need a bigger commercial income?
I don't think any sport that survives solely off public subsidy has the right business model.
Are academies and grassroots in this country supported enough?
I don't honestly think there's much from the league as a whole, as an organisation, to focus on the academies.
Do teams need more of a British core?
Kind of makes a big impact because they sit there and they say, oh well, I could do that and I could potentially be playing in the BBL, so I think the British core is hugely important.
Why are attendance levels so low?
The difference is that those players are on such a bigger stage internationally than anyone in the BBL. It's going to be hard to ever mimic that.
What does need to be done to grow British basketball?
That's $1 million question.
Basketball is one of the best team sports in terms of participation levels, with over 300,000 16 and over playing at least twice a month. But in the last wave of Sports England funding, basketball only got awarded £4.7 million over 4 years, because of its lack of Olympic medal potential. With this little funding, elite basketball could be pulled from competitions, which could affect British basketball massively.
It frustrates me that all because they don't see us as a, Olympic medal team in both for the women and the men, that they try to take our funding away. I think there's a lot more to do with just getting medals. We have a huge participation level in England, and kids need people to be playing at the high levels and playing, in places like the Olympics where they can get inspired, and that's essentially how you get into a sport, is that you get inspired by people and you get role models.
Basketball is a growing market in the UK, and I think the success of the national team program over the years at junior level and everything that is happening at the local level as well is great for our sport. But the reality is we need funding. We need UK sport funding so the national team program, that top end of our sport, can thrive and be successful in the long run.
Well, my views on funding and the situation we find ourselves with British basketball is quite clearly the medal potential formula is flawed. A team sport like basketball, where you pretty much have to hand the gold medal across to the United States before we start, you leave the rest of the world chasing 2 medals.
Despite its growing popularity, the funding for basketball is a real concern. I think as a country we need to look at how we adopt our funding model. It is great that we put the money behind going for gold, but we also need to put the money behind those sports that are growing in our communities, especially at our grassroots.
It's clear that funding is needed on the elite level, but grassroots and academies also need support as they grow the next generation. Academies are something that need backing because they're volunteer based, and we need to make sure that they don't get lost in our bid for Olympic success.
I think the way the government put together sports funding was probably right a few years ago. Britain wasn't winning very many medals at the Olympics, and they wanted, with the national lottery money, to have a huge injection of funding into sport. And that was right, and we've done really well at the Olympics and Commonwealth Games since. But I think in that big picture, we've missed out on community grassroots sport. We've missed out in particular on sports that are popular with members of ethnic minority communities and ones where poorer communities play. And basketball absolutely is one of those sports that I think should be getting more funding.
I don't honestly think there's much from the league as a whole, as an organisation, to focus on the academies. I believe each individual team in the league has their own way of dealing with their academies. Some don't even have them, some do. I believe that there is a lot of very, very passionate people out there. And unfortunately, you can go back to funding again. They just don't get the ammunition they need to get these kids to develop to the next level.
Accessibility to facilities is the biggest problem for youth development. Accessibility to facilities, accessibility to good quality coaches. Again, I'm not here to tell other people what to do. All I can say is look at what we've been doing developing basketball here in London from my perspective over the last 5 years with the Lions. We go out to schools, we try and educate coaches, we have our own academy program, we partner with a university, and we say to our youngsters, if you want to go to college in the States, that's great, and we'll clap you at the airport on your way there. If you want to stay here, you can work with our British coaches, you can go to our local academy, you can go to our local university, and you can train with a pro team, and you will be successful. We had Aaron Badibu playing here, 17-year-old Hackney graduate. Jonathan James is a regular on the team, local boy. We believe it's important because I think, well, what I've certainly learned with Justin Robinson on the team this year, basketball players and basketball people in London want to come and see him play.
With money lacking and basketball growing, something needs to be done in order for the sport to have the funds to grow. Sponsorship is the most logical avenue for basketball to explore, but how easy can this be when it's estimated 85% of sponsorship goes to football?
The money follows where the crowds are, and so you've got to build a community, you've got to build your crowd, and it's easier to, as a horrible phrase, fish where the fish are. And so because all the people, the perception is that everyone watches football, that means that that's where the money goes. I don't think any sport that survives solely off public subsidy has the right business model, and so what we need to use is the limited amount of funds that we have for public subsidy in the right way, targeting, and importantly building capacity. Now, basketball is a hugely popular sport for young people to get involved with, but that's not always carried through into later life. And so although we're getting great crowds at Raiders here in Plymouth, if you go to other basketball arenas around the country, they're not always full. So how can that be promoted more? Because if more people want to go and watch a basketball game, that means there'll be more likelihood of the broadcasters wanting to put that on. There'll be more likelihood of people buying the kit afterwards and wearing that stash around town. There'll be more people that want to contribute to the success story that is basketball.
What we have to understand is companies, marketing agencies don't have to take the easy way out because everybody rushes to football. You actually get much bigger bang for your buck with smaller sports. There's much more engagement. What we're really strong at in basketball is the closeness between the players in the field and the fans in the stands. We understand that we deliver for that community, and that's the area we need commercial people to get on board with.
It's tough because football is the leading sport over there. However, the NBA is not the leading sport over here either. You could argue baseball, then football, American football, then basketball. The only difference here is that, we do see probably 19 to 20,000 per arena in the NBA, and most BBL teams see probably 1,500 to 3,000 max. So there's not a lot of money in basketball in the UK right now. But the sport is continuing to grow, and I hope they continue to grow and find ways to do that.
In order to attract commercial opportunities, it's clear we need to attract more people to games. When the NBA was in London at the start of the season, they attracted 19,000 people to the O2.
O2 Arena is the site, and it is a good matchup between the Celtics and the Sixers.
The BBL struggles to get 2,000 at their games, so what do we need to do to emulate this?
I think what basketball needs to do is it needs to work with NBA, it needs to work with the EuroLeague, we need to work with all those different organizations to develop our sport, but it has to build its own audience as well. And it might not be necessarily 15 or 20,000 people like it happens in the NBA, or it happens in the NBA game coming to London, or in a EuroLeague game, but I feel basketball can have an audience between 5,000 to 10,000.
Two American teams playing professionally that they see on TV all the time, that's going to draw 19,000 people to an arena. But when you take the Plymouth Raiders and the London Leopards or London Lions or Guildford, whoever they are now, and bring in 2 or 3 Americans that are unnamed or they don't know who they are, and a bunch of British kids and some people from Europe, it doesn't draw that much. I think that's the difference, that those players are on such a bigger stage internationally than anyone in the BBL. It's going to be hard to ever mimic that.
American players are a large part of the sport in Britain and are clearly important to the teams. But do teams need more of a British core to them in order to inspire and grow basketball?
You know, if we're honest with ourselves, the higher level British players are probably too expensive for the teams in the UK to afford to bring back from where they're playing at the moment. And we want the league to be as higher level as we possibly can. So we do need the foreign imports. That's important to ensure that people come and watch the game and they want to see a high standard game. But obviously every team, if they could, would have 12 British players, of course. I'd be crazy not to want that. But at this point in time, I think that is a long, long way off.
We can say about that you need more British players, and we do. We need our best British players playing in this league because that's how you raise the profile of it. But I think it's professional sport at the same time. What we need to do is we need to make sure we develop the British talent. We need to make sure we give opportunity to British talent, British players to play in the league, and coaches as well, because there's some very talented coaches, and we've got to make sure we have a pathway for coaches in the league as well. But I think at the same time what we need to do is we've got to make sure we build the story around our league and keep on growing it commercially.
I think the British core, and obviously I'm a British player, is hugely important. You know, even just telling my story to kids and what I've done kind of makes a big impact, because they sit there and they say, oh well, I could do that and I could potentially be playing in the BBL. So I think the British core is hugely important.
It's clear to see that basketball's on the rise in Britain, but faces many challenges in order to be a main sport in this country. So on a final note, what does need to be done in order to grow British basketball?
That's $1 million question. I think there's a lot of things we can do, but obviously if it was easy we would be doing it. I mean, we have some smart people involved in the BBL and at the BBL franchises, and they're working very hard, and obviously the England governing body, and we have the British basketball as a whole. I don't have the answers for it, I really don't. I think there's many things we can do, and I think we have to do it together and be on the same page, and one day it will happen.
Media, facilities, they're the two key things for everything. I think you want clubs that will have their own facilities that will not just benefit the senior programs, but will also help the pathway. You want that media exposure, if it's TV, if it's radio, just kind of constantly pushing basketball.
There's guys out there with good strength, there's guys out there with good vision, they're there, and there's people that want to work hard. It's just making sure everyone knows who we are. And I think that's what the hardest task is of all.
I think basketball in Britain's got a really bright future ahead of it, but it still has some really big obstacles and hurdles to overcome in the meantime, and that's why it needs not only fans, clubs, those people that play in the sport, but it needs politicos and politicians like me to be talking up the opportunities that present themselves.
How else can we find money from the council outside of the organization to pay these professional players? I mean, they do it in football, and of course they have a bigger draw, but that's the other part, and that's the third wheel, is how do we get a better draw?
People are starting to really get involved. I think it's just about keep pushing. When obstacles get in the way, we need to just knock them down and keep, realizing what we're doing this all for, and see the bigger plan and the bigger picture.
The biggest thing that we need for basketball in this country to go forward from our community is to all sing from the same hymn sheet, to all appreciate and value our sport. We have great players, we have great coaches. We need to tell people about that. That's the biggest thing. Of course we need government funding and we need government support, but firstly we need to value what we put on the floor.